Our esteemed panel now to break down the situation in Syria and what can or cannot be done. Joining us from Washington, D.C., Colonel Cedric Leighton, U.S. Air Force retired, president of Cedric Leighton Associates. Good to see you, Colonel.
Good to see you too, Jonathan.
And with me in the studio here, former U.S. Ambassador John Price. Good to see you, Ambassador. Thanks for being here. Let me come to you first, Mr. Ambassador. Is there anything we can do in the short term, this week, to change the situation on the ground, or are we stuck with what is going to be a months and possibly years-long process here?
I don't think there's anything that can be done in the short term. I think you're dealing in a fight that's been going on for a long time, and we're in the middle of it. I think the regime change is going to be very difficult, and I think that the end plan is not going to be an outcome of democracy as we see it. I think that's a cliche. And so nothing in the short term. You saw that in North Africa, and you've got destabilization and chaos there. And what you've seen up there, you will see coming here as well.
Colonel, we're in the middle of it in the sense of what happens in Syria really matters to us here, but we're staying determinedly on the edge of it, really, practically speaking, aren't we? Is that the right thing to be doing?
Well, I don't think so, Jonathan. And my problem with the current policy is that we're not taking advantage of certain situations that are out there. For example, you have the really very evident Iranian connection to the Syrian regime. You have a way of going after the Syrian connection with Hezbollah, and you have a way of doing all of those things. Some of this, of course, has to happen covertly, but the other part of it is that we need to be very active diplomatically, and it seems both militarily and diplomatically we're holding back. And when it comes to the military option, the Pentagon is obviously, I'm sure, planning for some of the contingencies, but even a few months ago, the Joint Chiefs Chairman has been very explicit in saying that there really is not very much planning going on in terms of our ability to go after the Syrian regime, or at least to facilitate a regime change and to get a ceasefire in place there. And that's really the sad part about this, is that there's no move to a ceasefire and the civilian casualties keep mounting.
Yeah, the whole ceasefire, I think it's frustrating, Mr. Ambassador, for a lot of viewers to watch this, and they see the former UN Secretary General Kofi Annan making a, obviously a good faith effort, and then talking about the ceasefire may not hold, the ceasefire may not hold, we need to do more to implement the ceasefire. This ceasefire never took place. Why do these figures on the international stage insist on putting a rosier view on this than there really is? People are dying every day, as the Colonel says.
Well, you're dying every day, and that's sad. But if you go in and make a regime change and you take out Assad, you're going to have a worse situation. You're going to have the Shia and the Sunnis who've been fighting for hundreds and hundreds of years at each other. And you're going to, if you're losing 10,000 or 20,000 people a day, it's very sad. You will lose 10 to 20 times that amount. General Mattis, who is the CENTCOM commander, recently testified that we've put in arms and military support. Most of that is going to end up in the hands of Islamists. The Al-Nusra group is in there. The other ones coming in from Yemen, the other ones coming in from Iraq. It's the same problem that's happened in North Africa, where all the arms that NATO brought in and we brought in ended up now in south of the Sahel, and it's destabilizing countries like Mali. It's going to stabilize Niger. It's going to stabilize many others. That's the thing we're getting into, is you're dealing with an Islamist mixed group inside of the rebels.
Colonel, would you agree that this is one of the problems in intervening and getting further involved, is that we just have no idea what would come next, and it could be a worse situation from our point of view than President Assad?
Well, that's always a possibility, Jonathan. And, when you look at that, the ambassador is right. It is an exceptionally complex mix of cultures, mix of ethnicities, and obviously ideological currents also at play here. The real issue boils down to, what is in our national interest and what works best not only for our nation, but also other allies such as Israel, such as Turkey, and even Iraq. We have to take a look at how all of that works and what the mix is in these particular areas. So when you look at the different possibilities, none of them are very attractive, but the information gap that we're dealing with here is a very, very serious one, and it points to a need to really have a much more flexible and agile intelligence capability than we currently seem to have vis-a-vis Syria.
Ambassador, we've talked a lot about the problems of what may or may not happen, what could come as a post-Assad regime there. But what would you like us to see us do? What can we do? What are the solutions, if there are any?
Well, if we could turn the clock back 10 to 20 years, we should have started with education. We should have started bringing in some of the secular young people into this country and get them educated in learning how to deal with democracy. Democracy is not going to work in a tribal society. I mean, we think it will, but that's not going to happen. In a regime change, you're going to end up with Sharia, and you're going to end up with the Islamists in control. You're seeing it now. The new group that's being formed in Turkey, the rebel group there, is infiltrated by the Muslim Brotherhood. And then you've got the Kurds, and then you've got all the other groups that want to have control. And it's not about democracy, it's about control, and eventually you will end up with Sharia, not only in North Africa, you'll end up with it here, and that's not democracy, but that's what you're going to get.
And Colonel, talking of what comes next, we're seeing one of the sort of the messiness of democracy, shall we say, play out now in Egypt. We have the runoff for the presidential election there, which has ended up giving the Egyptian people essentially a choice between going back to a Mubarak-style regime with his former prime minister, or electing a candidate who is an Islamist with the Muslim Brotherhood. It doesn't play out the way we always want it to, does it?
No, it doesn't, and that's always the weakness whenever you have a democratic process or an attempt at a democratic process in countries that aren't quite used to democratic institutions as we understand them. The center is the one, the political center is the one that almost never holds. And you saw that with the Egyptian more liberal parties having a real difficult time capturing the vote, and the alternative basically being back to the future with a Mubarak prime minister, or go to the future on an unknown side with the Muslim Brotherhood. If the Muslim Brotherhood can be made to be more like a Turkish version, like with Erdogan, the Prime Minister of Turkey, that might be more acceptable to the West, but it obviously remains to be seen, and that is a very, very tough if you can get to that point. And the Muslim Brotherhood obviously has various tendencies within it, and that becomes a difficult piece to manage, I think, politically as well as diplomatically.
Ambassador, do you think the more secular movement within Egypt made a mistake in having so many candidates and essentially splitting the vote? Because in that first round, across the board, the more moderate secular candidates got more votes than these two who are now in the runoff.
I think there was a little bit of naivety there. They thought they could get more of a support than they did, but in the parliamentary elections, more than half are in the Muslim Brotherhood, and the other half are in Salafist hands. So you've got a very narrow profile there in religious thinking. And if the Muslim Brotherhood gets in, the Salafist group inside of the Muslim Brotherhood have said, we're going back to Sharia. And of course, if Shafiq gets in. But if Morsi gets in, you're going to have more uprisings because you're having it right now with people that don't want the military. So you're caught in between the Morsi group and the Shafiq group, and you're going to have real chaos.
Right. Colonel, would you agree with that we're looking at more chaos in Egypt?
Unfortunately, I think that's true. It's a very, very tenuous situation, and I think chaos is unfortunately the watchword of the day for Egypt and for the rest of the Middle East.
And talking of which, we're just getting some breaking news coming across the wires now, Ambassador. The British ambassador to Libya, his convoy was attacked in Benghazi, we're hearing. 2 close protection officers injured in that attack. One more sign that this Arab Spring has got a long way to play out before there's stability anywhere, I guess.
Well, in Libya, you've got a worse situation. I mean, there you take out Gaddafi, and they're slaughtering in Sirte all of these tribes people. They were in part of his tribe. Well, you're going to have the same thing with Assad's people. You know, they're all fearing that. So Libya is really a terrible situation with all the arms that have flown out of there, or flowed out of there into sub-Saharan Africa.
Colonel, it's still a very, very dangerous world, possibly getting more dangerous. It reminds me a little bit of the way we viewed the world in general after the Cold War. It was, in a sense, the Cold War was easy. We had the one enemy that was easy to control, and that was the way we sort of worked on everything. Now you're seeing this whole splintering, and we don't know who we're dealing with again right across the Middle East.
That's absolutely true, and that again points to the need, Jonathan, for a very robust intelligence picture of all of the areas that we could potentially be involved in. And the Cold War, as you said, was pretty easy in comparison. We spent a lot of time, in essence, bean counting how many bombers the Soviets had, how many fighters, how many weapons, how many nuclear weapons they might have had. In this particular case, it's not so much what they have, but how they are going to use it and what their intentions are in terms of their politics, their development culturally and nationalistically. All of those pieces play a large role, and it's very, very difficult for somebody who is used to a cut and paste method of intelligence gathering to actually get in and really do the job, and that's what this challenge really calls for.
All right, Colonel Cedric Leighton, U.S. Air Force retired, president of Cedric Leighton Associates, joining us from D.C. Thank you very much indeed, as always, Colonel.
My pleasure, Jonathan. Thanks so much.